So at this point, I've been freelancing on Upwork for 10 years now, but there was one project that almost ended my freelancing journey. This happened in 2018, which is 7 years ago at this point, and I already had 4 years of experience at that point. I got basically 5-star reviews for all of my past projects. So I was feeling pretty good before I started this particular project. And at the end of the project, I ended up with one 3-star review, but I almost ended up with two bad reviews in this situation. And I just want to let you know what mistakes I made, how to avoid them, how I try to avoid them in the future. And as all good stories start, like all terrible stories start, I needed the money in this case. So I was in a situation 7 years ago when I urgently needed to make money on Upwork. So I was in a bit of a rush to find a new client on Upwork. I wanted this client to be longer term. I wanted them to be a higher paying client, again, because of this money situation. And I did check the client's reputation on Upwork. Their ratings seemed okay, so that was like a green flag. But I didn't, since I was in a hurry, I didn't do a video interview with the client, which I think was a bad idea, because I always like to make sure that I have like a good chemistry with the person that I'm going to work with. And I was just in a hurry in general to get the project started, and that kind of backfired. Okay, so what happened was that this client, I was hired as a software developer to develop some features. But while I was working on these features, me and the client, we noticed that we had some server issues that was set up by the previous freelancer working on the project. And the first or biggest mistake that I made in this case, and again, I mostly had good experiences during my journey, so I don't want to make it seem like I only had like a lot of terrible projects, because that's not the case. But I do want others to learn from what I did wrong. So in this case, since this client had these server issues, sometimes I offered them to automate their whole server infrastructure. And so I looked on online what the options were. I ended up on Kubernetes. That's like a good popular server automation tool, I guess. It seemed like it. And the issue or the problem that I caused was that I didn't have experience with Kubernetes. I didn't even have that much experience with server related stuff either. I was mostly just during my past years, I mostly just developed new features. I was doing web development, but I wasn't like a server guy, like a DevOps person. So in hindsight, that was like a huge, and not a good idea to sell myself as like a server automation professional. So I wouldn't recommend that to anyone. And by the way, let me just put you in my mindset at that point. At that point, I was already freelancing for 4 years. So I just thought that, I was getting good reviews. I thought that I was smart or whatever. And I thought that I could probably just learn this Kubernetes stuff easily by reading the documentation, by going on forums. I guess I was just getting a bit cocky or arrogant, and I thought that would be easier to get into this stuff. But as it turns out, or turned out in this case, server automation and DevOps is like a whole other area that I was not familiar with, and I didn't know what I was getting myself into at that time. And also, besides this, it turned out that this client was very pushy. I think I mentioned this in my previous video that I had a pushy client. This was the one pushy client that I had on Upwork, and I didn't video interview them before the Upwork contract started. So I think that was not a good idea either. And it turns out that this client was very pushy from the start. So he asked me like sometimes even every 20 or 30 minutes, if I had any updates, how I was progressing with my tasks. And, a pushy client with a technology, Kubernetes, that I wasn't familiar with, that's not a good combination, and that's not a combination that you want to have. And here's the twist also, because this is like a bad enough situation, right? Because I promised to deliver something that I wasn't familiar with, and I had a pushy client on my hand, and at the same time, this client also started to have payment issues, which means that our contract on Upwork it got paused. I wasn't sure at the time why at first, but it got paused. It turned out because it was because of payment issues. And first the client asked me to maybe continue working, then we would put like the hours on the contract once the Upwork contract was re-enabled. I didn't like that idea. Luckily, I didn't agree to that at all. So what the client did instead of paying their due balance, was that they opened, I don't know if this is allowed but they opened a second Upwork profile, and they invited me to a new project on that second Upwork profile. So now I had two open projects with this client who was anxious. So he was very pushy, and also I promised him to deliver something with a technology, Kubernetes, that I didn't have experience with. So this was like the wonderful cocktail of trouble that I had on my hands. And basically the way I was able to get out of this was that so in Kubernetes I was stuck on an issue in this situation. I couldn't figure out, I don't remember what it was exactly, but I was stuck on some issue, and I was reading the forums, interacting with other DevOps people over the internet. I was asking their advice, and I don't remember what the issue was exactly, but I got stuck on one particular problem that I just couldn't solve for some reason. And so I had this client with 2 open contracts on Upwork with 2 potential bad reviews that I could get on my Upwork profile. So then I started negotiating with this client. I negotiated that, all right, could we, if I delivered like this set of features that this client wanted, then let's at least close out the first contract. And the client luckily agreed to that. So I successfully did the first set of changes. And once that was successful, the client did close the contract. I got a 5-star rating on that first contract, and that part was good. But I still had the second contract opened with this client, and I still had the issue in this new technology that I wasn't familiar with, that I couldn't solve. I don't know, I don't remember why exactly, but I couldn't solve it, and I just realized that I was kind of in a trap. So in the end, I don't remember what it was exactly, but I couldn't fully solve this issue with the client, and I ended up with one 3-star rating. I only had like basically 5-star ratings up until that point, and after that I also had only 5-star ratings, so this was the only 3-star that I got. And what I learned from this whole experience was that I should have interviewed the client before we started an Upwork contract, just because I think if we talked, I would probably, I probably saw that this client was a bit, not relaxed, maybe a bit pushy. Maybe he would have asked me a lot of questions about how fast I can deliver this, and I think I should have just talked to the client beforehand. Also, obviously, looking back, I shouldn't have promised or brought up this new technology that I wasn't familiar with. That was a bad idea. I should have set realistic expectations about when this can be delivered, and that can only be done, of course, if I have experience with the technology that I was promising. And so from then on, I never assume that I can learn something on the job, except if I tell the client that I'm not familiar with something, and they are okay with it. In that case, then that's fine. I did that in after this project, and just 2 examples. One, I did start to get into Angular on the job on one of the projects without any previous experience, and that turned out to be okay, although Angular is like more complicated than I expected. So the results were okay, but again, I didn't have all the expertise that I'm comfortable with. And on another project, I used React. Again, I told the client that I didn't have any React experience, and they were fine with it. And that project turned out to be like a success. The client was happy with the results. But again, React turned out to be easier for me to pick up. But it's a kind of a lottery, when you don't have experience with a new technology that you need to learn on the job. That's kind of a lottery. With React, it turned out to be okay, great actually. With Angular, it turned out to be okay-ish, not that great, but okay-ish. With Kubernetes, with this DevOps tool, basically, it turned out to be terrible for me. So yeah, I think those are the things that I learned from this experience, and I hope this helps someone, and I wish you a happy Upworking journey. Bye.